Now, there's a couple of ground rules. The principal one is that anything I say that's dumb and really off the wall is on me, and anything I say that's brilliant and insightful comes directly from Barack Obama. Okay, I can't be Obama, although we do look alike. There is a family resemblance, but I am going to try to outline and talk about energy from the point of view of this campaign and from the point of view of what he has put forth. I think I should say at the outset that at the beginning of the year I didn't have a candidate. And as an independent, I was sort of watching both camps, and as many of you know, I was involved in a group called Unity 08 that was looking to find a third way, a kind of middle ground, a nonpartisan way in this presidential election. Unity 08 didn't work out for a number of sort of some technical reasons. One of the biggest ones is we learned that in order to get a third candidate on the ballot for president, it costs about $50 million, which is a pretty daunting task. But one of the other reasons it didn't work out was that back in the winter, this candidate came pretty much out of nowhere, and he was articulating our message of bringing the country together better than we did. And his name was Barack Obama. And he really talked and acted in the kind of way of just the kind of nonpartisan approach to the solution, a pragmatic approach to the solution of our problems that we were indeed searching for. And you know, what I always said during the Unity 08 period was, if we end up with a candidate that takes a nonpartisan, bring the country together approach, we've won either way. And so that attracted me to Obama initially. I was also attracted to Senator McCain because I've observed his career for many years and admired his relative independence. And I thought, now, you know, how can we lose? Unfortunately, I don't know whether it's unfortunately, I would just characterize it as saying that my feelings and positive support for Obama has risen over the past year, and my feelings and support for Senator McCain has diminished. And I think I'm more sad about that than angry, but I just think it's unfortunate the way Senator McCain's campaign, the direction and tone, negative tone that it's taken. Well, let me talk a minute about energy because that's really what we're here to focus on. I don't have the exact statistics on this, but I'm pretty sure that you cannot find a state in the United States that's more dependent on oil than Maine. 50% of our electricity comes from natural gas. When I say oil, I mean fossil fuels. 50% of our electricity comes from natural gas. Virtually 100% of our fuel for our automobiles comes from oil. And of course, 80% of our homes are heated with oil. If you do the math on those three things in terms of their relative proportions, it means that 87% of the energy in Maine comes from fossil fuels. 87% of the energy in Maine comes from fossil fuels. That is a really scary prospect. As I say, I don't think there's another state in the country that is more dependent than we are on these fuels. That's sort of point number one. Point number two, when I was doing my research for the presentation at Bowdoin that Adam mentioned, which by the way is still on the MPBN website if you're interested, if you have, you know, if you're cutting your grass or something and you want to kill 40 minutes, it's on the MPBN website under Speaking in Maine. But as I was doing that research, I went back to 1998, 10 years ago, when gas was about $1 a gallon. Home heating oil was about $1 a gallon, and did a calculation of the percentage of a family budget spent on energy in Maine. What's the percentage of the average family income in Maine that was devoted to energy, heating your house, driving your automobile, and providing electricity? And the answer was, in 1998, it was about 4%. The amazing and appalling fact is, today it's 20%. It's gone from 4% to 20% of the average family budgets in 10 years. And what's really scary is that with the projections of the price of oil over the next 10 years, it's likely to go to 45 to 50%. And that leaves nothing for much else but health care and maybe pay the mortgage. In other words, Maine will be almost uninhabitable when and if oil reaches $300 a barrel, which means $10 a gallon for gasoline and $10 a gallon for home heating oil. That means filling up your car would be $200. Filling up the tank in your basement would be $2,000. Now, the projections for the increases in income to Maine citizens don't touch that. 1% a year maybe, but we're talking 11% a year on the average in terms of increases. Now, a lot of people say when we talk about this, don't worry about it, Governor. Oil's gone up before, it'll go back down. It went up in 74 when OPEC got itself organized. It went up in 79 during the Iranian hostage crisis. It went up in 90 at the time of the first Gulf War. It went up at the beginning of the Iraq War, but it always goes back down. I don't think that's the case this time. It will and has indeed gone down somewhat, as we all know, in the last several weeks. But stop and realize that when you drive down Lisbon Street and see the sign that says $3.65 a gallon, you think that's good. You know, that's a measure of how bad it is. If you had said to somebody in 1998, $3.65 a gallon, they'd have said, you're out of your mind. We can't possibly do that. $3.65 only looks good because 3 weeks ago it was $4. So the question is, why isn't this like the other times? Indeed, as I say, I think it will come down, it'll go back up, but the long-term trend is going to be up. Why? Because oil is a global commodity and the rest of the world is starting to use it as much as we do. Now, there's a measure of how much a society uses of oil, of energy, per person. And I think it's millions of BTUs per person per year. It's an awkward unit, but you know, think of it as lumps. You know, how many lumps of energy do we use? In the U.S., we use 350 million BTUs per person per year. So all you got to remember is 350. In China, the same comparable number, energy use per person per year, is 52. In India, it's 14. Remember, compared to 350. In Africa, it's 8. Now, the rest of the world is going to start to use more energy. There is no way we can tell people in China, you can't drive automobiles the same way we do. And when that happens, and I think one of the most frightening developments in the last year, and it didn't get any publicity really, was when a company in India called Tata Motors announced last winter that they were going to build a $2,500 automobile for sale in India and China. Last year, I'm on the board of Lee Auto. You all know Lee. We drove by Lee Credit Express coming in here. You know Shep and Adam and the Lee family. And David Swerdlick and I are on that board. And we get a publication, as by virtue of being on that board, called Automotive Week. And a couple of months ago, Automotive Week devoted the whole issue to China. And it gave all the automobiles and how the growth was going in sales of automobiles in China. And the bottom line was that last year, automobile sales in China grew 22%. Now, if you do the math, 22% is a doubling about every 3.5 years. And it's very, very frightening. So the idea that this thing is a spike, it's going to go back down to $1.50 a gallon or $1 a gallon, I don't think it's going to happen. Because no matter what we do here in the U.S., no matter how efficient we are, no matter how much we caulk our windows and drive carefully and drive hybrids, the worldwide demand for this product that God isn't making anymore is going to continue to go up. And you don't need to be an economist to know if demand goes up and supply is constant, then the price is going to go up. I mean, that's just one of the things that happens. So the reality is that we're facing what I call a catastrophe in Maine. There are 3 C's of a progression. One is a concern, the second is a crisis, and the third is a catastrophe. And that's what we're facing. It is no joke. This is very serious stuff, and it's going to be very serious this winter. It already is. The old discussion I remember in the 90s was people having to choose between medicine and food. Now it's going to be food and heat. And people are going to be moving in together, and we're going to have a very hard time. The governor's called together a task force. They've done everything they can do. This is a very hard thing for Maine to do on its own because it's a national and an international problem. So what do we do about it? Well, Senator Obama, I think, has the right approach. First, he's come up with, I think, a pretty good idea for a short-term solution, and that is to apply a modest windfall profits tax on the oil companies, which have made gigantic profits in the last few years, and basically give that back to the people of the country in the form of a $500 per person payment for their heat. That would be $1,000 a couple, $1,000 for a household, and the estimate is this winter in Maine, heating your home generally will be between $2,000 and $3,000. So that's a meaningful, short-term, immediate help that the federal government has it entirely within their power to enact. That's step one. And right off the bat, that's a difference from Senator McCain, because he has resisted any and all efforts, as far as I can tell, to tax the oil companies in any way. In fact, he's proposing to lower taxes on the oil companies, which strikes me as an odd solution. Now, the rest of Senator Obama's proposal is a comprehensive, try to look at all the alternatives approach. I've learned in public policy there is rarely a single answer. There's rarely one thing. If you do this one thing, everything will be fixed. It's usually a combination of things. Senator Obama hasn't ruled out offshore drilling, but I should mention that the offshore drilling is in no way a solution to this problem. Drill, baby, drill is a bumper sticker, but it's not a policy. If the United States government themselves, and I brought it, gee, I can't believe I actually brought the piece with me. Energy Information Administration official energy statistics from the U.S. government, and basically what it says is that if we started drilling tomorrow, the first oil wouldn't come ashore until 2017, and when it did, it would be about 200,000 barrels a day, and the worldwide demand is 85 million. So you ask yourself whether 200,000 on 85 million or 200 on 850 is going to change the price. The estimate is it'll change it by about a nickel. So the idea that we're going to be able to drill our way out of this is exactly what got us into this pickle in the first place. It's a very short-term solution, and it only postpones a more realistic solution, which is to get us off of oil. Now, there are one or two people in this audience, I can see you, who are as old as I am. And you probably remember Richard Nixon declaring energy independence in it would have been 1969, 1970. Well, here we are, almost 40 years later, and not a damn thing has happened. In fact, we're more dependent on imported oil today than we were 40 years ago. The only way to stop it is to stop it. And the only way to do that is to search for alternatives, and there are alternatives. I've proposed one, which is wind power in the Gulf of Maine. There's enough energy out in the Gulf of Maine to supply all the energy needs for the state of Maine forever. Cars, plug-in cars, heating homes with geothermal heat pumps, and electricity. Not just electricity, but cars and heating homes. It would be very, it's very doable. Now there's some R&D that has to be done. We know how to build wind turbines, we know how to build floating platforms, but we got to figure out how to put them together. But by the way, it could also be done in Maine. You know who's interested in this idea? Very interested? Chinbro. Remember Chinbro building the platforms in Portland Harbor about 5 years ago? Think of the jobs that this would create in Maine. 20 or 30,000 jobs building these things in Maine, floating them down the Penobscot or down the Kennebec, out offshore. When they needed repair, you'd bring them back in and create jobs here in Maine. This is going to happen, this offshore wind idea, and the question is it going to be Maine, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania? I think it can and should be Maine. And there are a lot of people working on it. When I made the speech at Bowdoin, I said it would be a 10-year project. I now think it's a 6 or 7-year project. There's a lot of opportunity. And a key part of Senator Obama's proposal, 2 key parts, are long-term tax benefits for alternative energy and a $150 billion investment, which sounded like a big number until a few days ago. $150 billion investment in developing things like plug-in hybrids, in increasing gas mileage, in developing alternatives, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, all of those alternatives that really have to be put in place as a package to find a solution to this problem. Now, I'm not going to spend much time at all criticizing Senator McCain. I'm not against Senator McCain. I'm for Barack Obama. I'm the most excited about his candidacy that I have been about any candidate since I was 16 years old, and a guy named John F. Kennedy was elected President of the United States. And there was a very interesting column about Obama just the other day by a leading conservative who said, I'm for Obama, not because I agree with all of his positions, not because I agree with that, you know, every position that he takes on health care or tax policy or anything else. This was a conservative saying, I'm for Obama because he's a pragmatist. He wants to solve the problems. He's not hung up on the ideology of we can never ever under any circumstances regulate anybody or we can't tax anybody. He just wants to solve the problem. And that's the kind of thinking that it's going to take to untie the Gordian knot of energy, healthcare, immigration. It's going to take a kind of practical approach. And sometimes, I don't know the political makeup of this room, sometimes it may not be the Democratic solution. But I think it will be the American solution. The thing that really tipped me in favor of Barack Obama was reading his book, The Audacity of Hope. Mary got it out of the Curtis Memorial Library. I introduced George Mitchell at the Curtis Library in Brunswick on Friday, and they talked about how supportive I'd been of the library, and I got up and said, I'm one of the most supportive people in Brunswick in the late fees that I pay. I've built a whole wing with late fees over there. But one of the late fees was on Obama's book, which Mary took out on disc so you could listen to it. And he reads it himself. And by the way, he wrote it himself. You can tell he wrote it. It's his voice, and it's his thinking. It is the most insightful analysis of the current political situation in this country, how we got where we are, and how we should get out of it, that I've ever read. And it's not doctrinaire. It's not ideological. He disagrees with some positions of the Democrats. Frankly, I'm surprised they didn't beat him over the head with it more in the primaries. But it is a tremendous piece of analysis. And you come away with 2 conclusions. This guy is really smart, which, by the way, I never knew should be a disqualification. You know, a friend of mine wrote an op-ed in the Bangor News over the weekend that said, do you realize that the world is now turned completely upside down because all of us were taught 2 things and that we tried to teach our kids. One was get in the best college you can, and the second is when you get out of that good college, give back to the community. Both of those things are now seen as political liabilities. That's weird. I got to say, I think that's weird to be sneering at somebody who left an Ivy League college and had an opportunity to go to Wall Street and make all the bucks and rip us off, and instead went back to a big city and worked with inner city people that were suffering from the closures of the manufacturing jobs. That's what we want to encourage in our kids. That's what I wanted my kids to do. Not sneer at it and say it's a bad thing. So anyway, I said there were two things. Obama is very smart, but he also has judgment. He has good judgment, and he makes decisions in a systematic way. He gathers information. He tries to weigh the balance of the information, and he wants to try to make the right decision for the country. So my sense is that his energy plan is the right one. Now, I have to disclaim a little bit because I am in the wind business. Although this offshore project I don't view as a money-making proposition. That's something I think is bigger than any private enterprise solution. In fact, you've heard of wind farms. This thing I'm proposing is a wind ranch. This is big. So I don't view that as a business proposition. I am in the wind business, but I do also know that without some support for some period of time, these alternatives aren't going to be developed. They need some support. For all of my growing up, the oil industry had all kinds of special supports. Remember the oil depletion allowance? This is something that we need to do in order to develop these alternatives. And if we can get ourselves off of oil, by the way, the price we're paying at the pump is not the whole price. We're paying for wars and armies and all kinds of incidental costs that have to do with oil. And if you want to talk about the cost of this offshore wind project, which would provide all the energy that Maine needed for the next 25 years, 2 weeks in Iraq would buy the whole thing. Isn't that amazing? That's pretty amazing. I shouldn't, maybe I exaggerated. 3 weeks, okay? 3 weeks. And we've got to start making these kinds of investments. And my sense is that Barack Obama is the guy that can and will do this. He understands it. Now, I said I know that I'm not going to bash Senator McCain, but I will say that 8 times in the last year, well, let me back up. Last winter, the Congress passed an energy bill with support for ethanol and all kinds of other things, but did not have any of the tax incentives that had been in place for wind, geothermal, solar, and alternative technologies. Those were left out of the energy bill. Why? Because they wanted to pay for them. There's a concept. Congress wanted to pay for any benefits that they conferred. They proposed a profits tax on the oil companies to pay for them, and it was stripped out of the bill, and Senator McCain was one of the people that made that happen. 8 times since then, that measure to provide the incentives to the alternatives in this country, 8 times since last winter, that bill has come to the floor of the United States Senate, and 8 times Senator McCain has either been absent or voted against it. And 1 time it failed by 1 vote. So I got to tell you, when I see an ad with him in it with the windmills going in the background, it bugs me. Because the truth is, in the end, actions speak louder than words. You can have the best energy plan, and you can talk about them and read about them and everything else, but when the chips were down and the question was, do we really want to put our money where our mouth is on providing some support for alternative energy development in the country, Senator McCain wasn't there, literally wasn't there. So I've concluded, and I don't, like I say, I don't have any partisan stake in this thing, but I've concluded that Senator Obama is the right guy at the right time in the right place. For all my life, people have been saying, this is the most important presidential election of my lifetime. How many times have we heard that? I think this really is. The country, and I don't want to depress you, but the country is in the worst shape it's been in my adult life. And I was in North Carolina yesterday talking to school people. The people down there were in a county that's lost 2,000 jobs in the last 5 years. They have 11% unemployment rate, and they just don't know what to do. And the reality is, forget about the budget deficit, forget about the energy problem, forget about the immigration problem, forget about foreign policy. The big reality is the incredible competition that our children are going to face as they grow up in this globalized world. If you get a job at McDonald's in Lewiston, Maine, you get about $6.50 or $7 an hour. If you get the same job in McDonald's in Beijing, you make 52 cents an hour, and the same job in McDonald's in India, you make 29 cents an hour. That's a realistic comparison of wage rates. We are not going to beat those people by working more cheaply. We can't do it. So every effort in this country should be pushing toward making our young people more competitive, better educated, better prepared. Instead, we're throwing weights on them to hold them back. My image is of the kids out there treading water like crazy. How's it going? I'm doing okay. I'm holding my own with China. It's okay. I've got a job. It's working okay. You say, okay, that's great. Here's an anvil. Hold this while you tread water. The anvil is called a $406 billion deficit this year. I'll end with one observation. About a year ago, I was in the hardware store in Brunswick and just chatting with the guy behind the counter, and I said, so what do you think of the Bush tax cuts? He said, there haven't been any tax cuts. I said, of course there were. You know, the Bush tax cuts, big tax cuts in 01, another big tax cut in 03. You know, these are big tax cuts, big deal. He says, no, there were no tax cuts. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you don't understand, Governor. If you cut taxes and keep spending and borrow the difference, it's not a tax cut. You've just passed the tax on to your kids. I'd never thought about it that way before. It's an interesting way to look at it. We're enjoying all the expenditures, but our kids are going to have to pay the bills. This $700 billion bailout, the people who are going to pay that off have already been put to bed by their parents tonight. And this we're doing at a time when these kids are going to be facing a kind of intense competition, the likes of which none of us have faced. Certainly we have started to face it, but it's only going to get worse. So we really need somebody in there that is thinking about how to do things differently and gets it. And I think Barack Obama is that person. Thank you.